Look at your hands. No, really. Wherever you are right now, in bed, on a couch, curled against a pillow, just look at your hands for a moment. Spread your fingers. Notice the creases in your palms, the tiny lines that fork and converge like dried riverbeds. Your nails slightly curved, slightly translucent at the tips, growing right now, in this second, whether you ask them to or not. Your hands are warm right now. Blood is moving through them. You can feel your pulse if you press your thumb gently against the inside of your wrist. That soft, shallow groove where the skin is thinnest. That rhythm has been going since before you were born. It started in the dark, in the womb, when you were a curl of cells no bigger than a grain of rice. And it hasn't stopped since. Not once. Not for a single second of your entire life. Hold that thought. Now, if you have a cat nearby, and statistically a surprising number of you do, look at its paw. That soft, tucked, velvet thing it keeps hidden beneath its chest. If you've ever been allowed to hold one, and allowed is the right word, you felt the pads. Warm, dry, a little rough, like fine-grained leather left in the sun. Here's something that might keep you up tonight if you let it, but I promise we'll turn it into something that puts you to sleep instead. Your hand and that paw are cousins. Not in some loose, poetic sense. I mean it the way a geneticist means it. Somewhere around 85 million years ago, a single creature, small, warm, nocturnal, terrified of almost everything, scurried through the ferns beneath dinosaur feet. Its heart beat fast, its eyes were wide, and every mammal alive today, every whale, every bat, every dog, every human, and every single house cat sleeping on a radiator in Glasgow right now, descended from that one shaking body. 85 million years is a long time. But the story I want to tell you tonight is about something much more recent. Something much stranger. Because out of the millions of species that share that ancient ancestor, only one looked at human beings, truly looked at us, with all our noise and chaos and fire, and decided, on its own terms, to stay. No leash. No cage. No command. It just stayed, and it's still here. Probably within arm's reach of you right now. Purring. Beat. Let the silence sit for 2 full seconds. Welcome. If you're new here, this is where we go slow. This is where we take the enormous, overwhelming span of time that stretches behind you, all the way back to the first flicker of life in warm, shallow water. And we walk through it the way you'd walk through a museum after hours. No crowds. No rush. Just the quiet click of your shoes on marble and the low hum of something old and patient waiting behind the glass. Tonight's exhibit is about a partnership, maybe the strangest partnership in the entire history of life on Earth. It's not the story of the dog. Everyone tells the dog story. The dog is a love story, loyal, codependent, slightly desperate on both sides. It's beautiful, but it's not what happened with cats. Not even close. The cat story is something else entirely. It's a negotiation, and to understand it, we need to go back, not to ancient Egypt, not to the pharaohs and the temples and the golden statues, though we'll get there, but further, back to a time before writing, before cities, before the first field of wheat was ever planted, back to the moment when a small, sand-colored predator with amber eyes sat at the edge of a human settlement in the Fertile Crescent and made a calculation. Not a conscious one, not the way you'd calculate a tip or weigh a decision, but a calculation nonetheless, written in instinct, in hunger, in the slow, patient arithmetic of survival. That wildcat looked at the grain stores. It looked at the mice swarming around them. It looked at the strange, upright apes with their fires and their noise. And it thought, or whatever the feline equivalent of thinking is, this could work. That was 10,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. And here's the part that still makes biologists argue in conference hallways and over lukewarm coffee. The cat was never really domesticated. Not the way dogs were. Not the way horses, cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, or pigs were. Every one of those animals was reshaped, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, by human hands. Bred for size, for speed, for milk, for wool, for obedience. The cat barely changed at all. Soft ambient music begins, something with a low drone and the occasional sound of wind. Think, night desert. Let me put this in perspective, because numbers alone don't do it justice. The dog was domesticated somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago. The range is wide because the evidence is messy, and honestly, archaeologists love to argue almost as much as the rest of us. But in that time, the wolf became the Chihuahua. The wolf became the Great Dane. The wolf became the Pomeranian, the Bulldog, the Labrador, the Dachshund. The original animal was bent and stretched and compressed into over 350 recognized breeds, many of which can no longer survive without human help. That is what domestication looks like when humans drive the process. We are not subtle sculptors. We are aggressive editors. We take a wolf and, in a geological blink, we turn it into a pug that can barely breathe. Now look at the cat. 10,000 years of living alongside us. And the African wildcat, Felis libica, and your house cat, Felis catus, are so genetically similar that they can interbreed freely. They produce healthy, fertile offspring. In many cases, you cannot tell them apart by looking. A geneticist at Washington University once put it this way, and I'm paraphrasing because the original quote involved more profanity. The domestic cat is essentially a wildcat that tolerates you. That's it. That's the entire 10,000-year journey. Not submission, not obedience, not transformation, tolerance. And if that doesn't fascinate you, I don't know what will. Because it means that unlike almost every other domestic animal on Earth, the cat chose this. The cat walked into the human world, weighed the costs and the benefits with the cold precision of a creature that has been a solitary predator for millions of years, and decided, generation after generation, kitten after kitten, that the deal was acceptable. Mice for proximity, warmth for presence, shelter for, well, not much. Maybe the occasional slow blink. So here's what we're doing tonight. We're going to trace that choice. From its first, tentative footstep at the edge of a Neolithic grain store in what is now southeastern Turkey, through the temples of ancient Egypt, across the deck of a Roman trading ship, into the dark heart of medieval Europe where cats were burned alive because frightened people needed something to blame, and finally into your living room, your bed, your phone screen where you've almost certainly watched a cat video in the last 48 hours. It is a story written in DNA, in ancient bones, in the chemical residue of 10,000-year-old pottery, and in the soft, vibrating hum of a creature that is, right now, somewhere near many of you, turning in a circle 3 times before lying down. That turning, by the way, is a behavior inherited from wild ancestors who needed to flatten grass and check for snakes before sleeping in the open savanna. Your cat does it on a memory foam bed. It doesn't need to, but the code is still running. 10,000 years wasn't long enough to erase it. Very little about the cat has been erased. That's the point. Pause. Let the ambient sound carry for 3 seconds. Before we go further, I want to do something. If you're listening to this to fall asleep, and I hope you are, because that's what this is for, I want you to settle in. Adjust your pillow. Pull the blanket up a little higher if you need to. If your feet are cold, tuck them in. There's no test at the end. There's no quiz. If you drift off somewhere between the Fertile Crescent and the fall of Rome, that's perfect. That's the whole idea. Your brain will keep listening even as you slide under. Some of this will settle into your memory, like sediment at the bottom of a still lake. Some of it won't. Both are fine. And if you're still awake at the end, well, then you'll know something extraordinary about the animal sleeping at your feet. Now, tell me something in the comments, if you're still with me. Where are you in the world? What time is it where you are? I love reading those. Someone in Sao Paulo at 2 in the morning. Someone in Edinburgh at midnight. Someone in Seoul, just before dawn, with a cat on their lap who has no idea it's descended from a North African desert predator. Tell me. I'll read them. Music shifts slightly. A single plucked string. The drone continues beneath. Let's start with the detective work. Because this story, the story of how and why cats came to live with us, was, for most of human history, completely unknown. We had myths. We had assumptions. We had Egypt. Everyone always starts with Egypt. And Egypt is important. We'll get there. But Egypt is the middle of the story, not the beginning. Starting with Egypt is like walking into a film halfway through and assuming the character on screen was born in that scene. Cats were already ancient partners by the time the first Egyptian scribe carved a hieroglyph. The Egyptians didn't invent the relationship. They inherited it. They elevated it. They turned it into religion. But the roots go deeper. The real beginning is quieter. Muddier. Literally. It starts in dirt. In 2004, a team of archaeologists led by Jean-Denis Vigna was excavating a site on the island of Cyprus, a rocky, sun-baked place in the eastern Mediterranean, The kind of landscape where the light is so bright it bleaches the stones white and makes your eyes ache. They were working at a Neolithic village called Shilarocambos, which had been occupied roughly 9,500 years ago. They found a grave. Inside the grave was a human, an adult, probably important, buried with care. Offerings surrounded the body. Polished stones. Worked flint. The kinds of things you bury with someone you want to honor. And 30 centimeters away, close enough to touch, close enough that the placement could not possibly be accidental, was a cat. A young cat. 8 months old, the bones suggested. Buried in its own small pit. Oriented in the same direction as the human. West. Toward the setting sun. Toward whatever these people believed waited on the other side of the horizon. This was not a wild cat that had wandered into a grave. This was not a coincidence. This was intentional. Deliberate. Someone had buried this cat with this person because the relationship between them mattered. Because the cat meant something. 9,500 years ago. No one on Cyprus was writing anything down. No one was carving temple walls or painting tombs. This was long before Egypt's first dynasty. Long before the pyramids were even a concept. These were early farmers, people who had only recently, in evolutionary terms, stopped wandering and started staying in one place. They were still figuring out agriculture. Still learning which seeds to plant and when. Still negotiating the terrifying new reality of depending on a single plot of land instead of ranging across the landscape like their ancestors had for hundreds of thousands of years. And in the middle of that enormous, disorienting transition, from nomad to settler, from hunter to farmer, they had already formed a bond with a cat strong enough to carry into death. Here's what makes the Cyprus find even more remarkable. And this is the detail that shifts the entire story. There are no wild cats native to Cyprus. None. The island separated from the mainland long before cats evolved. Which means that cat, that 8-month-old cat buried with such care, was brought there. By boat. Picture that. A Neolithic boat. Not a cruise liner. Not even a proper ship. A hollowed log, maybe, or a frame of bent wood lashed together with sinew and sealed with pitch, that thick, black, tar-like substance that smells like a hot road in summer. The crossing from the mainland to Cyprus is roughly 70 kilometers. In open water. With currents. With wind. And some early farmer making that crossing 9,500 years ago, carrying seeds, carrying tools, carrying everything they needed to start a new life on an island. Also carried a cat. Not livestock. You carry goats and sheep because they give you milk and meat and wool. That's economics. That's survival. A cat gives you none of those things. A cat gives you mouse control, yes. And on an island where you're starting grain stores from scratch, that matters. But there's something else in that choice. Something that goes beyond utility. Because you don't bury a pest control tool with your dead. You don't orient a mousetrap toward the setting sun. You do that with a companion. Let the music breathe. 5 seconds of just the drone and the faint sound of water, a creek, maybe, or a slow tide. So the mystery deepens. And this is where the DNA enters the story. Not from the Cypress cat, though that too has been studied, but from a much larger project. One of the most ambitious genetic detective stories ever attempted on a domestic animal. In 2007, a geneticist named Carlos Driscoll, working with a team spread across the United States, Europe, and the Middle East, published a study that redrew the entire map of cat domestication. They sampled DNA from nearly 1,000 cats, wild cats from every corner of the Old World, the European wildcat, the Chinese mountain cat, the sand cat, the jungle cat, the Central Asian wildcat, and domestic cats from 5 continents. What they were looking for was the maternal lineage, mitochondrial DNA, which passes only from mother to offspring, unchanged except by occasional mutation. It's a molecular clock, a record of ancestry that ticks backward through time, mother to mother to mother, all the way to a single point of origin. And what they found was this. Every domestic cat on Earth, every tabby in Brooklyn, every ginger tom in Dublin, every blue-eyed Siamese in Bangkok, every alley cat in Cairo, every barn cat in Kansas, every tortoiseshell in Tokyo, every thin-legged stray in Istanbul, descend from one subspecies. Felis libica, the African wildcat, not the European wildcat, which is bigger, fluffier, and far more aggressive. A creature that hisses at humans the way you might hiss at a wasp in your kitchen. Not the sand cat, which is adorable but profoundly antisocial. A hermit of the dunes that would rather dehydrate than share a water source. Not the jungle cat, which lives in wetlands and wants nothing to do with anyone. Not the black-footed cat of southern Africa, a tiny, fierce thing that kills more prey per hunt than any other wild feline and has absolutely no interest in your living room. Only Felis libica, only that one slender, tawny, large-eared ghost of the near eastern grasslands. An animal you could pass on a hillside in modern Turkey or Jordan and mistake, easily, honestly, for someone's lost pet, because it looks almost exactly like a domestic tabby. Same size, same build, same faint, dark stripes on the legs, same sand gold coat that shifts to cream on the belly. And more specifically, the DNA pointed to a single geographic origin, the Fertile Crescent. That arc of land stretching from modern-day Iraq through Syria, southeastern Turkey, and down into the Levant. The same place where wheat was first cultivated. The same place where barley, lentils, and peas were first grown in deliberate rows. The same place where humans first stopped moving and started building permanent villages. This is not a coincidence. This is a story about grain. Beat. The music shifts to something slightly warmer. A distant, low-pitched flute or something that evokes open grassland at dusk. Here's how it probably happened. Not certainly. The evidence is circumstantial. Bones, chemistry, DNA. No one was there with a camera. But the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, and the story it tells is so elegant that even the scientists who argue about the details tend to agree on the shape. About 12,000 years ago, in the hills above the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, something unprecedented happened. Humans began to farm. After roughly 300,000 years of hunting and gathering, 300,000 years of following herds, foraging for nuts and roots, sleeping under different skies every few weeks, waking to birdsong in a forest 1 month, and a wind across open steppe the next. Some groups in this region started planting seeds and staying to watch them grow. It was not a sudden revolution. It was slow, messy, experimental, probably terrifying. Imagine the commitment. To stop moving, to say this patch of ground is mine, to bet your life and your children's lives on the hope that seeds you buried in the mud would become food before your stored supplies ran out. Many early attempts probably failed. Crops died in unexpected droughts. Stores rotted in unexpected rains. Insects descended in clouds. People went hungry and went back to hunting for a season or two before trying again. But gradually, over centuries, it took hold. Villages formed around fields. Walls were built, and granaries appeared. Simple pits at first, lined with plaster or stone, where harvested grain could be kept dry and safe through the lean months. And the grain attracted mice. Of course it did. Mice are opportunists of the highest order. A granary is, to a mouse, an infinite buffet that appeared out of nowhere. The house mouse, Mus musculus, exploded in population around these early farming communities. Archaeological sites from this period show a dramatic spike in mouse remains. The mice came for the grain the way water finds a crack in a dam. Inevitably, irresistibly, and the mice attracted cats. Felis libica was, and still is, a solitary ambush predator of small rodents. That is its entire profession. It is not a pack hunter. It does not chase down antelope. It does not fish. It sits. It watches. It waits. And when a mouse moves, it strikes with a speed and precision that makes a rattlesnake look clumsy. So picture it. You're a wildcat. You live in the dry grasslands on the edge of the Fertile Crescent. You hunt alone. Your territory is wide. Mice are scattered, unpredictable, hard to find. You spend most of your night walking, listening, failing, trying again. And then, one evening, you crest a low hill and smell something. Grain. Not interesting to you. But beneath the grain smell, something else. Mouse. Not one mouse. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. A concentration of prey, so dense it would take your wild brain a moment to process. The way your brain would short-circuit if someone dumped a swimming pool full of your favorite food in front of you. You approach, carefully, because you are a cat and careful is your factory setting. The settlement is loud. There are fires. There are people, large, unpredictable, moving in ways you can't anticipate. Your every instinct says leave. But the mice are right there. And so you stay. Not inside the settlement. Not yet. At the edge. In the shadows. You hunt the mice that spill out from the grain stores into the surrounding grass. You eat better than you've ever eaten in your life. And the next night, you come back. And the next. And the next. The humans notice you. Of course they do. But here's the critical thing. They don't chase you away. Because you're solving their problem. Every mouse you eat is grain saved. Every rat you kill is a winter that doesn't end in starvation. You are useful to them in a way that requires absolutely no effort on their part. They don't have to feed you. They don't have to train you. They don't have to do anything at all. They just have to not kill you. And that mutual, silent, unspoken agreement is where it begins. Not with a leash. Not with a command. Not with a treat or a whistle or a name. With tolerance. The same word that genetics would confirm 10,000 years later. You tolerated them. They tolerated you. And from that double tolerance, something grew. Slowly. So slowly that no single generation would have noticed. The way a river cuts a canyon. Not in a day, not in a year, but across millennia, one thin layer of stone at a time. Music fades to almost nothing. Just the faintest hum. Let the silence hold. And here's where I want to leave you for now. At that edge. At the border between wild and tame. Between the grassland and the granary. Between the old world and the new. Because the cat is still standing there. In a sense, it's been standing there for 10,000 years. One paw in the wild, one paw in your house. Never fully crossing over. Never fully leaving. Every other domestic animal crossed that line completely. The dog crossed it and never looked back. The cow crossed it and forgot the other side existed. The sheep crossed it so thoroughly that it lost the ability to survive alone. The cat is still at the threshold, still deciding. And in part 2, we're going to follow the DNA. We're going to open the bones and the chemistry and the ancient pottery residue and ask the question that has driven a generation of geneticists slightly mad. If the cat was never truly domesticated, if it barely changed, if it kept its claws and its independence and its quiet, calculating stare, then what exactly happened? What is the biological word for what the cat did? Because domestication doesn't quite fit. And the answer, when we find it, will change the way you look at the animal on your lap. Ambient sound, a low, steady purr, layered beneath the drone, almost subliminal. But for now, settle in. Let your eyes close if they want to. Feel the weight of your own body pressing into whatever surface is holding you. You are a mammal, a warm-blooded, oxygen-breathing, dream-having mammal. And somewhere in the dark, in the next room, on the foot of the bed, on a windowsill looking out at a world it still half belongs to, there may be another mammal. A small, quiet, self-contained one. One whose ancestors looked at yours across a fire-lit gap 10,000 years ago and made a choice that neither species fully understands. You're here. It's here. And that, tonight, is enough to begin. So, we left the cat at the threshold. One paw in the wild, one paw in the firelight. Standing at the edge of a Neolithic grain store somewhere in the Fertile Crescent. Eating mice it didn't have to work very hard to find. Watching humans it didn't fully trust, but had decided not to flee from. That was 10,000 years ago. And now we need to do what any good detective does when they arrive at a scene that's been cold for millennia. We need to look at the evidence. Not the stories. Not the myths. Not what we assume happened because it feels right. The actual, physical, measurable evidence. The kind you can hold in your hand. Or, more accurately, the kind you could dissolve in a lab and read under a sequencer. Because the story of the cat's domestication, or whatever we end up calling it, was not solved by historians. It was not solved by archaeologists alone. It was solved, in large part, by people who spend their days in windowless rooms pipetting tiny volumes of liquid from one tube to another, staring at columns of genetic code on a screen, and arguing about single nucleotide polymorphisms over sandwiches they forgot to eat. Geneticists. And the tool they used, the one that cracked the whole thing open, is ancient DNA. ADNA. Letters pulled from the bones of creatures that have been dead for thousands of years. And if that sounds simple, I promise you it is not. Beat. Music softens to almost nothing. Let's talk about ancient DNA for a moment. Because understanding what it is and how fragile it is will help you appreciate just how remarkable the cat story becomes. DNA is not stone. It is not metal. It is not ceramic. All of those things survive beautifully in the archaeological record. A stone tool from 3 million years ago can look almost the same as the day it was knapped. A bronze sword from the collapse of the Hittite Empire can be cleaned and held and even, theoretically, used. DNA is none of those things. DNA is a molecule. A long, spiraling, impossibly thin molecule made of sugar, phosphate, and 4 chemical bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. ATGC. The alphabet of life. And from the moment an organism dies, that molecule begins to fall apart. Water gets in. Oxygen gets in. Microbes get in. The long strands of code that once held the instructions for building an entire living creature. Every whisker, every claw, every rod cell in the retina of a cat's eye start a fragment. The bonds between the bases break. The sugar backbone snaps. Within days, the DNA is in pieces. Within years, those pieces are in smaller pieces. Within centuries, what remains is a shattered jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing and the ones that survive warped and stained beyond easy recognition. Extracting usable DNA from ancient bones is like trying to read a book that has been soaked in water, torn into confetti, mixed with the confetti of 1,000 other books, and then buried in mud for 10,000 years. And the contamination problem is severe. Your own DNA, shed from your skin, carried on your breath, clinging to the latex of your gloves, is everywhere. A single skin cell from the archaeologist who excavated the bone, or from the museum technician who cataloged it, or from the geneticist who opened the sample bag, contains more intact DNA than the entire ancient specimen. Ancient DNA labs look like surgical theaters. Researchers wear full-body suits, face masks, and double gloves. They work under ultraviolet light that destroys stray modern DNA on contact. The air is filtered. The tools are bleached. Every surface is treated as a potential crime scene, because in a sense, it is. The crime is contamination, and it can destroy years of work in a single careless breath. And yet, people do it. They have been doing it with increasing precision since the late 1980s, and in the last 15 years, the technology has accelerated so fast that what once took a decade now takes weeks. The key innovation was next-generation sequencing, machines that can read millions of tiny DNA fragments simultaneously, like 1,000 librarians working in parallel, each one piecing together a different torn page. You don't need the whole book. You just need enough fragments that overlap, enough repeated letters that you can stitch the sentences back together and read the story. And the story written in cat bones turned out to be one of the most surprising in the entire field of domestication genetics. A soft shift in the ambient layer. Something slightly brighter, like the first gray light before dawn. Still gentle. In 2017, a study was published that represented the single most comprehensive genetic analysis of cat domestication ever attempted. It was led by Claudio Ottoni and a large international team, and it drew on ancient DNA from over 200 cat remains spanning roughly 9,000 years of history. Bones from Neolithic farming villages. Bones from Egyptian tombs. Bones from Viking ports. Bones from medieval European towns. Cats that had lived and died across an enormous swath of time and geography, each one carrying in its cells a record of where it came from and who its ancestors were. The team focused primarily on mitochondrial DNA, the same eternal lineage that Carlos Driscoll had used a decade earlier. But they also looked at nuclear DNA markers, including one that would prove unexpectedly important. We'll get to that. What the mitochondrial analysis revealed was a story with 2 distinct waves, 2 separate expansions, 2 moments in history when cats moved out of their ancestral range and into the wider world. Not because they were driven or herded or loaded into cages, but because the humans they had attached themselves to were moving, and the cats followed the mice that followed the grain that followed the humans. The first wave began in the Fertile Crescent and radiated outward with the spread of agriculture. As farming moved west into Anatolia, across the Aegean, into Greece, along the Mediterranean coast, and eventually into the interior of Europe, cats went with it. Not as cargo, not as captives, as shadows. They followed the ecological niche, the granary, the storehouse, the barn, wherever it appeared. The DNA showed clear Fertile Crescent lineages in cat remains from early farming sites across southeastern Europe, dating back roughly 6,000 to 8,000 years. These were not yet pet cats. That concept didn't exist. These were commensal animals, a word from ecology that means sharing the table. Commensal species benefit from human activity without being directly managed by humans. Rats are commensal. Pigeons are commensal. Cockroaches, deeply, stubbornly, unfairly successfully, are commensal. But here's where cats break the commensal model. Rats and pigeons and cockroaches are parasites of human infrastructure. They take without giving. They exploit without reciprocating. The relationship is one-directional. The animal benefits, the human suffers, or, at best, doesn't notice. Cats gave something back. Every mouse killed was food preserved. Every rat driven away was disease avoided, though the humans of the Neolithic wouldn't have understood it in those terms. The cat was a commensal that doubled as a service provider. It was a tenant that paid rent in dead rodents. And that mattered. That was the hinge. Because it meant that humans had an active incentive to tolerate the cat's presence. Not just ignore it, but subtly protect it. Don't throw stones at the cat. Don't let the dogs chase the cat. Maybe, and this would have been a slow, generational shift, not a conscious decision. Maybe leave a bit of fish out near the grain store. Maybe let the kittens stay. And that subtle, passive selection pressure, that gentle tilting of the scales in favor of cats that were a little less afraid, a little more willing to linger, a little calmer around human noise and human movement, is the entire engine of what happened next. Now, the second wave. And this one has a location so specific, it almost feels like a stage direction. Egypt. The Anatolia study found that a distinct mitochondrial lineage, one that had been present in Egyptian cats for thousands of years, suddenly exploded across the Mediterranean, into Europe, and eventually into sub-Saharan Africa and the Indian Ocean world, beginning roughly 3,000 years ago and accelerating through the Roman period and the early medieval centuries. This is the Egyptian wave, and it changed everything. Because whatever was happening in the Fertile Crescent, that slow, passive, mutual tolerance between cats and farmers, Egypt took it further. Egypt took it somewhere entirely new. In Egypt, cats were not just tolerated. They were not just useful. They were sacred. And not sacred the way we sometimes use that word casually, meaning important or valued. Sacred in the fullest, heaviest, most literal sense. Sacred the way the Nile flood was sacred, a force that could bring life or ruin and therefore demanded reverence. The goddess Batet, originally a fierce, lion-headed war deity, all fangs and fury, the kind of goddess you prayed to before battle, had by the first millennium BCE transformed into something softer, a cat-headed goddess of home, fertility, and protection, of domestic warmth, of the hearth fire, and the sleeping child. Temples were built in her name in the city of Bubastis in the Nile Delta, enormous complexes where priests maintained colonies of living cats within the temple grounds, feeding them, caring for them, and, when they died, mummifying them with the same reverence accorded to human dead. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt in the 5th century BCE, reported that when a household cat died, the family shaved their eyebrows in mourning. He may have been exaggerating. Greeks loved to exaggerate about Egypt, but the archaeological record supports the broad shape of his claim. Egyptians grieved their cats. They wrapped them in linen. They painted tiny cat-shaped coffins. They placed them in tombs alongside food offerings meant to sustain the cat's spirit in the afterlife. And when I say mummifying, I do not mean a few cats here and there. I mean millions. That is not an exaggeration. In the late 19th century, a single cat cemetery at Beni Hassan in central Egypt was excavated and found to contain an estimated 80,000 mummified cats. 80,000 from one site. The total number across all known sites is difficult to estimate, but it runs into the millions. Some of these mummies were beloved pets, buried with care and ritual. Others were purpose-bred by temple industries, raised, killed young, wrapped, and sold to pilgrims as votive offerings. A cat mummy was something you could buy at the temple gates the way you might buy a candle at a cathedral today. The scale is staggering, and it tells us something critical about what had happened to the relationship between humans and cats by this point. It had moved beyond utility, beyond pest control, beyond commensalism. It had become cultural, emotional, spiritual. The cat had entered the human imagination in a way that no purely practical animal ever does. You don't build a temple for your mousetrap. You build a temple for something you love. Music introduces a faint, reedy instrument, something that evokes the Nile Delta at dusk. A single note, held long and then released. And here's where the nuclear DNA marker comes in, the one I mentioned earlier. Because among the genetic data the Anatolia team analyzed was a gene that has nothing to do with behavior, nothing to do with disease resistance, nothing to do with survival in any obvious way. It's a gene for coat color. Specifically, the gene responsible for the blotched tabby pattern, that marbled, swirling, asymmetrical coat pattern that many domestic cats display, as opposed to the mackerel tabby pattern, which is striped, regular, and identical to the wild-type coat of Felis libica. Now, This might seem like a trivial detail. Coat color. Who cares? The cat is the cat regardless of whether its stripes are straight or swirled. But to a geneticist studying domestication, coat color variation is a signal flare. It's one of the first things that changes when a wild animal begins the process of domestication. It happened in dogs. It happened in horses. It happened in cattle, pigs, sheep, rabbits, and foxes. The famous Belaya fox experiment in Siberia, where researchers selectively bred wild foxes for tameness over several decades, produced foxes with floppy ears, curled tails, and piebald coats within just a few generations. No one selected for those traits. They appeared spontaneously, linked by developmental pathways to the genes that govern tameness. This is called the domestication syndrome, and it's one of the strongest signals we have that a species is undergoing genuine, directional change under human influence. It suggests that the genes controlling tameness are tangled up, in ways we still don't fully understand, with the genes controlling pigmentation, ear cartilage, tail curvature, and skull shape. Change one, and the others shift like furniture in an earthquake. It's a package deal, and when it shows up, it means something real is happening at the genetic level. The animal is being reshaped. So, when did the blotched tabby pattern appear in cats? Late. Shockingly late. The Atoni study found that the blotched tabby allele, the genetic variant that produces the swirl pattern, was essentially absent from the archaeological record until the medieval period. It didn't show up in Egyptian cat DNA. It didn't show up in Roman cat DNA. It appeared in detectable frequencies only in samples from the Ottoman Empire, roughly the 14th century. The 14th century. That means that for the first 8,000 years or more of the cat-human relationship, cats showed no visible signs of domestication syndrome at all. Their coats didn't change. Their ears didn't flop. Their tails didn't curl. They looked, and genetically largely were, wild animals that happen to live near people. 8,000 years of cohabitation, and the cat's genome barely flinched. Compare that to the dog. Within a few thousand years of domestication, dogs had already diversified into recognizably different types. Large and small, long snout and flat-faced, thick-coated and thin. The wolf's genome was being rewritten at speed. The cat's genome was reading a book in the corner and ignoring everyone. Beat. Let the ambient breathe. 5 seconds of just the reedy instrument and the slow tide. So what does this mean? What does it tell us about the nature of this relationship? It tells us something that the geneticists themselves have struggled to name, because the standard vocabulary of domestication doesn't quite fit. Domestication, in the traditional sense, implies human control. It implies selective breeding, choosing which animals mate, which traits are favored, which lineages continue. Humans did this with dogs, with cattle, with wheat, with rice. It is an act of power, an imposition of will. With cats, that didn't happen. Not for millennia. The evidence is overwhelming. No selective breeding, no controlled mating, no directed change. The cat lived alongside humans, benefited from the relationship, tolerated the proximity, and remained, genetically, behaviorally, morphologically, almost entirely wild. The term that some researchers have started using is self-domestication. The idea that certain species, under the right ecological conditions, can undergo a softening of their flight response and an increase in their tolerance of social proximity. Not because someone is breeding them for it, but because the environment rewards it. The cats that were slightly less afraid of humans ate more mice. They survived better. They had more kittens. Those kittens inherited this slightly reduced fear. And over hundreds of generations, the population shifted, slowly, barely perceptibly, toward tolerance. Think of it like a river changing course. No one redirects a river by force. Not really. Not permanently. A river changes course because the ground shifts beneath it, because one path becomes slightly easier than another, because rain falls a little heavier on one side of a valley over 1,000 seasons. The river doesn't decide. The landscape decides for it. And the cat didn't decide, either. Not in any conscious sense. But the landscape of survival tilted, just slightly, in favor of the cats that could stand to be near us. And the river of their lineage followed that tilt. Imperceptibly. Inevitably. Not tameness. Tolerance. And this distinction matters. A tame animal has been broken. A tolerant animal has made a choice. Or, more precisely, a tolerant animal is the product of thousands of tiny choices, made by thousands of individual ancestors, each one choosing, in the most basic, biological sense of the word, to stay rather than flee. There's another term floating through the literature, one that I find more honest and more beautiful. It comes from a Russian evolutionary biologist named Dmitry Belyaev, the same man who ran the fox experiment. He called the early stages of cat domestication natural selection for tameability. Not tameness itself, tameability, the capacity for tameness. The door left ajar, not flung open, and that door, left ajar 10,000 years ago in a grain field in the Fertile Crescent, is still only ajar. Your cat can be sweet. Your cat can be affectionate. Your cat can curl up against your chest and purr so hard you feel it in your sternum. But your cat is also 2 missed meals from hunting sparrows in the garden. Your cat's pupils still dilate to full black circles when something moves fast across the floor. Your cat still carries, in every cell of its body, the complete genetic toolkit of a solitary desert predator. It just chooses, most of the time, not to use it. On you. A very faint sound, the suggestion of a purr, barely audible, blended into the ambient layer. There's one more piece of evidence I want to leave with you before we move into the living, breathing world of Part 3. One more clue from the forensic record that ties this all together. Isotope analysis. When an animal eats, the chemical signatures of its food become locked into its bones and teeth. Carbon isotopes, nitrogen isotopes, they form a record of diet that can be read thousands of years after death. And in 2014, a team studying cat remains from a Neolithic site in central China, Quanhucan, roughly 5,300 years old, used isotope analysis to show that the cats at this site were eating a diet heavy in millet-based food. Millet is a crop. These cats were not eating wild rodents from the forest floor. They were eating rodents that had been feeding on stored grain, or, in some cases, they may have been eating grain-based food directly, possibly scraps from human meals. The cats were dining at the human table, not literally, but isotopically, chemically. Their bones carried the signature of an agricultural economy. They were entangled, metabolically, ecologically, biochemically, in the human world. And one cat in particular stood out, an older individual. Its isotope profile showed a diet unusually low in protein compared to the others. Less meat, more grain-based food. This can mean several things. But one interpretation, and the researchers flagged it carefully because scientists are cautious people and the dead do not give interviews, is that this cat was being fed by humans. That someone, 5,300 years ago, in a farming village in China, was giving a cat something to eat. Not because the cat needed it for survival, necessarily, but because the relationship had moved past pure utility into something warmer, something more like care. You have to be careful not to read too much into a single isotope profile. Bones are not diaries, but place that finding alongside the cypress burial, a cat honored in death. Place it alongside the millions of Egyptian mummies, cats elevated to divinity. Place it alongside the genetic evidence of self-domestication, a species that changed itself, slowly, to fit alongside us. And a picture emerges, not of domestication as we usually understand it, not of conquest or control, but of convergence. 2 species, each following their own survival logic, arriving at the same place. Literally, the same grain store, the same village, the same hearth, and discovering, over thousands of years, that the arrangement worked. The cat got mice, warmth, and shelter. The human got pest control, and, eventually, something harder to quantify. Companionship. The quiet pleasure of watching a small, graceful, self-contained creature do its small, graceful, self-contained thing. And neither species had to sign a contract. That's the forensic record. Bones, DNA, isotopes, coat-color genes, mitochondrial lineages traced across continents and centuries. It's a detective story told in molecules, and it has taken decades and hundreds of researchers to assemble. But it's still data. It's still abstraction. You can know, intellectually, that a wildcat walked into a grain store 10,000 years ago. You can understand the genetics. You can follow the logic. But you can't smell the grain. You can't hear the mice. You can't feel the heat of the fire or the cold of the night air on your arms as you step outside to check on the stores and see, in the moonlight, two amber eyes watching you from the shadow of the wall. That's what part 3 is for. In part 3, we leave the lab, we leave the data, and we go back, all the way back, to a single night in a Neolithic village, somewhere in what is now southeastern Turkey, roughly 9,000 years ago. I'm going to put you there. I'm going to let you feel it. The mud under your feet, the smoke in your hair, the sound of something small and warm, moving just outside the circle of firelight, deciding, again, as it has decided every night for generations, to stay. But not yet. Let that image sit. Let it settle, the way the evidence settled, slowly, layer by layer, like sediment at the bottom of a lake that hasn't been disturbed in 10,000 years. Close your eyes if they're not already closed. Breathe. You are a mammal descended from survivors who share their warmth with a small predator that never asked permission and never said thank you. And that predator's descendant might be lying next to you right now. Its bones full of the same isotopes as your last meal. Its DNA carrying the same mitochondrial story it carried when its ancestors crossed the Mediterranean on Roman ships. It's still here, still choosing. Close your eyes. I mean it. If you haven't already, let them fall shut. Not tight, not squeezed, just closed. The way a door closes when the wind pushes it gently and the latch catches with a soft click. Let your eyelids do that. Let them rest. Now, I'm going to take you somewhere. Not forward. Back. A long way back. Past the medieval cathedrals and the burning pyres. Past Rome and its legions and its cargo ships full of grain and cats. Past Egypt and its gold and its linen-wrapped dead. Past all of it. All the way back to the beginning of this story. You are standing in a village. It is night. The air is cool. Not cold, but cool the way desert air gets after the sun drops below the horizon. As if the earth is exhaling everything it absorbed during the day. You can feel it on your arms. On the back of your neck. That particular stillness that happens in dry climates when the wind dies and the sky opens up into a darkness so complete that the stars don't just appear. They press down. They crowd the sky like salt spilled on wet stone. You are in southeastern Turkey, or what will, in 10,000 years, be called southeastern Turkey. Right now, it has no name, not one that anyone will ever write down. The people here don't write. They don't need to. Everything they know, the names of plants, the movement of animals, the stories of their dead, lives in memory, in voice, in the rhythmic, repetitive telling of things around fires exactly like the one you're standing near. The village is small, maybe 40 people, maybe 50. It's hard to tell because some of them are away, hunting, foraging, visiting kin in another settlement half a day's walk to the south. The structures are low, made of mud brick and timber, flat roofs covered in packed earth and dry brush. They look, from a distance, like the land itself decided to rise up in lumps. Nothing here is taller than a person. Nothing here is trying to impress anyone. These buildings exist to keep rain off grain and warmth inside bodies. And the grain is everywhere. Not scattered. Stored. Carefully. Painstakingly stored in pits dug into the earth and lined with a pale, chalky plaster that the people here make by burning limestone and mixing the powder with water. The process takes days. It is hot, dangerous work. The burning limestone can sear skin and blind eyes. But the result is a surface that resists moisture and keeps the grain dry through the wet season. Emmer wheat, mostly, and barley. The kernels are small and tough. Nothing like the plump, golden wheat of the modern world. These are early crops, barely a few generations removed from their wild ancestors, still half-feral themselves. But they are food. They are survival. They are the reason this village exists at all. The reason these people stopped walking and said, "Here, this ground, this is enough." The air smells like smoke. Like roasted grain, a warm, nutty, slightly bitter scent, the smell of barley that's been parched over coals to make it easier to grind. Beneath the smoke, you can smell the earth itself. Clay, dust, the faint mineral tang of the plaster drying on a newly repaired storage pit. And if the wind shifts from the south, you catch something else, the green, living smell of the river valley below, where reeds grow thick along the banks, and the water moves slowly enough that you can hear it only if everything else is silent. Everything else is silent. Almost. The fire crackle sharpens for a moment. A log pops, then settles. A woman sits near the fire. She is not old, but she is not young in the way we'd measure youth. She is perhaps 30. In this world, 30 is the far side of middle age. Her teeth are worn, ground down by a diet heavy in stone-milled grain that carries tiny fragments of grit in every mouthful. Her hands are rough, calloused at the base of every finger. The nails are short, cracked, stained with the ochre she used this morning to mark a pot she'd shaped from river clay. She is not sleeping. Not quite. She is in that liminal state, the one you might recognize, the one you might be in right now, where the body has given up on full alertness, but the mind hasn't quite agreed to let go. She watches the fire with half-lidded eyes. A child sleeps beside her, curled against her hip. The child's breathing is slow and even, a tiny bellows rising and falling with a mechanical regularity of deep, untroubled sleep. One small hand rests on the woman's thigh. She can feel the warmth of it through the rough woven fabric of her garment. A simple tunic made from plant fibers beaten and twisted into thread on a hand spindle. It itches. It always itches. But it's warm, and warmth is what matters now. The grain stores are behind her. She can't see them from where she sits, but she can hear them. Not the grain itself. Grain doesn't make noise. But the mice do. A faint scratching. A scrabble of tiny claws on plaster. The soft thud of a small body dropping from the rim of a storage pit into the grain below. These sounds have become the background noise of her life, as constant and unremarkable as the wind or the river. She hates the mice the way you might hate a dripping tap. Not with fury, but with the dull, grinding irritation of a problem that never goes away. She's tried everything, covering the pits with flat stones. The mice squeeze through gaps she can't even see, lining the rims with thorny brush. The mice chew through it. Posting one of the older children to watch the stores at night. The child fell asleep. The mice are winning. They have always been winning. They are smaller, faster, more numerous, and they want the grain exactly as much as she does. And then, something moves. Not a mouse. Something larger, smoother. A shape in the darkness at the edge of the firelight, where the orange glow fades into gray, and the gray fades into black. It moves low to the ground. Not slinking exactly. Flowing. The way water flows over a stone, with a bonelessness that no human body can replicate, a liquid quality that makes it hard to tell where the animal ends and the shadow begins. She sees it. She's seen it before. Many nights now. Weeks, maybe. It comes after dark. It stays near the grain stores. And in the mornings, she finds small bodies, mice, voles, the occasional rat, left near the pits. Not eaten. Not always. Sometimes just killed and abandoned. As if the act of catching was the point and the eating was an afterthought. She does not know what to call this animal. Her people have a word for it. Something guttural, something that mimics the sound it makes when threatened, that low, vibrating growl that seems to come from inside the earth itself. But she doesn't use the word much. She doesn't need to. The animal is simply there, part of the landscape, like the river, like the stars, like the mice. She watches it move along the base of the mud brick wall, pausing every few steps to listen. Its ears, enormous, out of proportion to its small, narrow face, rotate independently, like two dishes scanning for a signal. They lock onto something she can't hear. A mouse, probably, moving inside the wall or beneath the packed earth of the floor. The cat's body goes still, completely, unnervingly still, every muscle locked, every joint loaded. The only movement is the very tip of its tail, twitching in a slow, metronomic rhythm, like a conductor counting down to the first note of something violent. Then it moves, so fast that the motion blurs. One moment it's a statue. The next moment there's a sound, a brief, high-pitched squeal, cut short, and the cat is sitting upright with something in its mouth. Something small and gray and no longer moving. The woman exhales, not in surprise, in something closer to satisfaction, or perhaps recognition. The understanding that this arrangement, whatever it is, works. She does not reach out to the cat. The cat does not approach her. There is a distance between them, 4 meters, maybe 5, that neither crosses. It is not a wall. It is a boundary, understood by both, respected by both. The cat eats its mouse in the dark, and the woman watches the fire, and the child sleeps, and the grain sits in its plastered pit with slightly fewer thieves than it had an hour ago. This is not a love story. Not yet. It is a business arrangement, silent, unsigned, renewed every night by the simple act of not leaving. Morning. The light comes fast in this part of the world. Not the slow, gray, northern dawn that seeps in like watercolor, but a sharp, golden blade that cuts across the plain and hits the village all at once. One moment it's dark. The next, every mud brick wall is burning orange, and the shadows are long and black and crisp-edged, and the air is already warming, and the smell of the night, that cool, mineral, damp earth smell, is burning off like fog. The woman is up. She's been up since before the light. There is no concept of sleeping in. There is no snooze button. There is work, and it begins the moment consciousness returns, and it does not end until the fire burns low again. She splashes water on her face from a clay vessel near the doorway. The water is cool, drawn from the river yesterday, and it smells faintly of the earth that lined the pot. It feels good. A small reset. A tiny luxury. There are grinding stones near the central hearth. Large, flat slabs of basalt, smooth on top from years of use, rough on the bottom where they grip the earth. She kneels beside one, her knees on a folded hide that has been shaped by her body over months of use until it carries the exact impression of her kneecaps like a mold. She begins to grind the emmer wheat she retrieved from the storage pit. The motion is ancient, rhythmic, forward and back, forward and back. The stone against stone makes a sound like slow breathing, a low, sustained rasp that rises and falls, rises and falls. Her shoulders ache. They always ache. Her lower back aches too, a deep, constant compression that she has known since she was a girl, since her mother first showed her the grinding stone and guided her small hands through the motion that would define her mornings for the rest of her life. This is the hidden tax of agriculture, the labor that no one accounts for when they talk about the revolution of farming. The revolution gave them surplus. It also gave them arthritis, spinal compression, repetitive strain injuries, and teeth worn in nubs by stone dust in every meal. But it gave them the ability to stay. And staying, for all its costs, was worth it. Staying meant you could build. Staying meant your children grew up knowing the same trees, the same paths, the same faces. Staying meant you could bury your dead in a place you would return to, and visit them, and remember. The nomadic life was freer, in some ways, but it was also lonelier. Every campsite was temporary. Every goodbye was potentially permanent. Settling down was a trade. Freedom for continuity, range for roots. And the cat had made the same trade. In miniature, around the village, the morning unfolds with the slow, practiced rhythm of people who have done the same things in the same order for as long as any of them can remember. A man checks the plastered storage pits, running his hand along the rims, feeling for cracks where water might seep in during the next rain. Another scrapes a goatskin with a flint blade, long, careful strokes that peel away the fat and sinew until the hide is thin and pale and ready for working. The sound is a wet, rhythmic scraping, like someone dragging a stick across packed sand. Smoke rises from a dozen small fires. Someone is heating bitumen, natural tar, black and glossy, gathered from seeps along the river, to seal a cracked pot. The smell is sharp and chemical and oddly modern, like hot asphalt on a summer road. It clings to the hair, to the clothes, to everything.
The children find the cat first. They always do. 3 of them, 2 girls, 1 boy, the oldest perhaps 7, crouch at the base of a wall where the cat has retreated to sleep. It's tucked into a narrow gap between the mud brick and a stack of firewood, curled into a shape so compact it's hard to tell where the head ends and the tail begins. One ear, just one, is visible above the curve of its body. It twitches when the children whisper. The smallest girl reaches out, slowly, the way children do when they know something is fragile or uncertain. Her fingers stretch toward the cat's back. She doesn't touch it. Not quite. Her hand hovers, close enough to feel the warmth rising from the fur. Because cats are warm, warmer than you'd expect, their resting body temperature a degree or 2 higher than a human's. A small furnace wrapped in a velvet case. The cat opens one eye. Gold. Steady. The pupil contracts to a vertical slit in the morning light. A slit so narrow it looks like a crack in the world, a fracture in the amber. It does not hiss. It does not flee. It watches the hand, calculates, and then it does something that no fully wild cat would do. It closes the eye again. It stays. It allows the proximity. It does not invite the touch, but it does not punish the attempt. And the girl pulls her hand back, grinning, and whispers something to the other children, and they all grin too, and the cat sleeps on, and nobody in the scene thinks they are making history. But they are, because this moment, this exact dynamic, a child reaching for a cat that tolerates the reach without reciprocating it, is the hinge of the entire story. This is where the biology meets the emotion. The cat stays not because it loves the child, but because its threshold for flight has been nudged, generation by generation, just far enough that a small human hand is no longer a threat worth fleeing from. And the child reaches out not because she's been told to befriend the cat, but because there is something in the human brain, Something old, something that predates language and agriculture and everything we think of as civilization, that responds to small, warm, soft, large-eyed creatures with a surge of tenderness so powerful it overrides caution. This is the neurochemical hook. Oxytocin, the same hormone that floods a mother's brain when she holds her newborn. The same molecule that bonds human pairs, that makes eye contact between a dog and its owner feel like a conversation. Cats, with their round faces, their large eyes, their small size, their soft fur, trip the same wires. Not identically, not as strongly, perhaps, as a human infant or a puppy, but enough. Enough that a child in a Neolithic village reaches out. Enough that a farmer doesn't throw a stone. Enough that, over centuries, the distance shrinks. The ambient shifts. We're moving into evening again. The cycle of a day. The fire returns, softer now. Someone is humming. A low, atonal melody, not a song, just a sound. The way people hum when they're tired and their hands are busy. Evening again. The second night. The woman sits in the same place. The child sleeps in the same position, curled against her hip. The fire has been rebuilt from the morning's embers. A skill so basic to these people that they do it without thinking, the way you flip a light switch. Tinder, kindling, fuel. Breath. A steady, focused stream of air from pursed lips, directed at the glowing coal until it catches. The smell of fresh smoke, sharp, acrid, alive, fills the space for a moment before the fire settles into its low, sustained burn. And the cat is closer. Not much. A meter, maybe less. It's hard to tell in the dark, but the woman notices. She noticed last night, too. The animal is testing the boundary, moving it inward, a handspan at a time, the way a negotiator makes small concessions to see what the other side will accept. The woman does nothing. That's the key. She doesn't lean forward. She doesn't extend her hand. She doesn't make a sound. She simply exists, warm, still, unthreatening, and lets the cat decide. And this, right here, is the fundamental difference between how cats and dogs were domesticated. Dogs were pulled toward us, actively recruited, selected, shaped. The early relationship between humans and wolves likely involved humans feeding wolf pups, raising them within the group, punishing aggression, and rewarding cooperation. It was directive, interventionist, a project. The cat was not a project. The cat was a guest that kept showing up, and the host, wisely, perhaps accidentally, had the good sense to leave the door open without making a fuss about it. And so the distance shrinks, night by night, generation by generation, not because anyone wills it, but because the ones who stay closer eat better and sleep warmer and have more kittens who grow up thinking that the smell of smoke and the sound of human voices is just normal, just the background noise of being alive. The way you grew up thinking that cars and sirens and the hum of a refrigerator at 3 in the morning were just the sound the world made. Environment becomes identity. Given enough time, the humming fades. The fire pops once softly, a long silence. Then, beneath it all, barely audible, a purr. Picture one more thing before we leave this place. Picture a night, not this night, but a night many generations later, maybe 500 years deeper into the partnership, maybe 1,000, when a woman in a similar village sits by a similar fire and feels something she doesn't expect. A weight, on her lap, not heavy, 2 kilograms, maybe 3, but warm and vibrating. That low, steady, mechanical thrum that seems to come from the animal's entire body, not from its throat but from its chest, its belly, its bones. A frequency, roughly 25 hertz, that falls in a range known to promote tissue healing, to reduce stress, to lower blood pressure, to slow the human heart. The cat doesn't know this. The woman doesn't know this. Nobody will know this for another 9,000 years. But her body knows. Her nervous system knows. The vibration enters through her skin, and her muscles read it as safety, as calm, as the absence of threat. And something in her, something deeper than thought, deeper than language, something that lives in the old, quiet part of the brain that she shares with every mammal that has ever lived, relaxes. Let's go. Settles. The way sediment settles when the water finally stops moving. She places one hand on the cat's back. The fur is soft, softer than anything she owns, softer than the woven fabric of her tunic, softer than the kid hide she kneels on to grind grain, softer than the surface of the river water she cups in her hands to drink. The cat's body is warm beneath the fur. She can feel the heartbeat, fast, much faster than hers, a small, quick drum buried under the ribs. The cat does not purr louder at her touch, but it does not stop. It does not tense. It does not leave. And in this moment, something shifts. Not in the genes. That shift is already happening, has been happening for centuries, will continue for millennia. Something shifts in the story. The narrative that these two species are writing together, unconsciously, in the only language that evolution understands. Behavior, repeated, across time. The cat is no longer just a pest controller. The cat is comfort, and the woman is no longer just a passive host. She is chosen. The ambient fades to almost nothing. The purr remains. Low, steady, the heartbeat of 10,000 years. That village is gone now. The mud brick dissolved back into the earth it came from. The plaster crumbled. The timber rotted and became soil. The grinding stones cracked and were buried under the rubble of walls that fell and were rebuilt and fell again. The grain rotted and became soil and grew new grain that was harvested by new people who built new walls that also crumbled. Layer after layer after layer. This is what an archaeological tell is. A hill made entirely of collapsed human lives, stacked like pages in a book that no one meant to write. You can see them across the landscape of the modern Middle East. Low, flat-topped mounds rising gently from the plains, covered in grass and wildflowers, looking for all the world like natural hills until someone sinks a trench and finds, a meter down, the blackened remnant of a hearth where a woman once ground grain and watched a cat move through the dark. But the cat survived. The lineage continued. Mother to daughter to daughter to daughter. Each one carrying the mitochondrial DNA that Claudio Ottoni would read 9,000 years later. Each one carrying, in her cells, the code for large ears and golden eyes and tolerance. Just a tolerance, never a submission, for the loud, clumsy, fire-making apes that kept building grain stores full of mice. And if you're lying in bed right now, and if there's a cat near you, on the pillow, at your feet, on the windowsill, on the floor in a square of moonlight that it found before you even knew the moonlight was there, then you're living inside the scene. You are the woman by the fire. The cat is the shadow at the edge of the light. The deal is still in effect. The boundary is still being negotiated. 10,000 years, and neither side has signed a contract. Maybe that's why it works.
Come back. Come back from the village. From the fire. From the mud brick walls and the grinding stones, and the woman with the worn teeth and the aching back. Come back from all of that, slowly, the way you come back from a deep sleep. Not all at once, but in layers. First the body, then the sounds, then the light behind your eyelids, then the recognition of where you are. You are in your bed, or on your couch, or in a chair. You are in a room with walls that are not made of mud, but of drywall, or plaster, or concrete, or wood. There's electricity running through those walls, silent, invisible rivers of it, powering the device you're listening to right now. There is treated water in pipes beneath your floor. There is food in your refrigerator that was grown on 3 different continents and arrived at your local shop in a truck that burned refined petroleum, pulled from rock formations laid down 300 million years ago. You live in a world that the woman by the fire could not have imagined. Not because she was less intelligent. She wasn't. Her brain was identical to yours in every meaningful way, but because the world she lived in hadn't yet built the chain of inventions, each one resting on the one before it, that leads from the grinding stone to the microprocessor. She was standing at the beginning of that chain. You are standing, lying, rather, if things are going well, somewhere near the current end of it. And yet, you still have a cat. Think about how strange that is. Really think about it. Almost every other relationship that defined the Neolithic world has been replaced. We don't grind grain by hand anymore. We don't plaster storage pits. We don't spin plant fibers into thread on hand spindles, or scrape goat skins with flint blades, or seal cracked pots with river bitumen. The entire technological and economic framework of that woman's world has been dismantled and rebuilt so many times that nothing visible remains. But the cat is still here. Not because we need it. That's the part that should stop you. We do not need cats. Not in any practical, economic, survival-based sense. We have not needed cats for pest control since the invention of the spring-loaded mousetrap in 1897, and arguably long before that. We have not needed cats for grain protection since the development of sealed, industrialized storage systems. We have not needed cats for anything except the one thing that no technology has ever been able to replace. Company. The quiet, undemanding, non-negotiable company of a living thing that exists in the same room as you, but does not require your attention, your performance, your conversation, or your emotional labor. A creature that asks, in the clearest possible terms, for food, for warmth, for a door opened at an inconvenient hour, and then asks for nothing else. That sits on a windowsill and watches the world with an expression that could be deep contemplation or could be absolute vacancy, and you'll never know which. And somehow that's fine. That's more than fine. That's the entire appeal. And here is where the ancient story and the modern world collide. Because the reason the Cats Company feels so good, the reason 600 million domestic cats currently share the planet with 8 billion humans, the reason the internet is functionally a cat distribution system, the reason you're listening to this at all, has everything to do with the mismatch between the world your brain was built for and the world you actually live in. Your brain is old. Not old the way a building is old, or a book is old. Old the way a river is old. Carved by forces that operated long before anyone was watching, shaped by pressures that no longer exist, but whose contours still define the landscape. The basic architecture of your brain, the limbic system, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the prefrontal cortex, was laid down over millions of years of primate evolution and fine-tuned over roughly 300,000 years of human life in small, mobile, face-to-face groups of 20 to 150 people. That is the world your brain expects. Small groups, known faces, physical proximity, shared labor, long silences, dark nights with actual darkness, not the pale blue glow of screen. Mornings that begin with the sun, not an alarm. Danger that has a shape and a smell and a sound. A predator, a storm, an enemy. Not the formless, ambient anxiety of a news cycle that never ends, and a social hierarchy that is measured in metrics you can't touch. This is the mismatch hypothesis, and it is not speculative. It is one of the most robustly supported frameworks in evolutionary psychology and behavioral medicine. The idea is simple. Your body and brain were optimized for an environment that no longer exists. And many of the chronic problems of modern life, insomnia, anxiety, depression, loneliness, addiction, the feeling of being overwhelmed by nothing in particular, are symptoms of that mismatch. Not flaws. Symptoms. Your brain isn't broken. Your brain is running the correct software for a world that was deleted 10,000 years ago. And here's the deep time perspective on this, because it helps to feel the scale. If the entire 300,000-year history of Homo sapiens were compressed into a single 24-hour day, the agricultural revolution, the moment we settled down, the moment the mismatch began, would have happened at roughly 11:43 at night. The Industrial Revolution would have happened at 11:59 and 40 seconds. The smartphone would have arrived in the final half second before midnight. Your brain has had less than 1 second of a 24-hour day to adapt to the world you're living in right now. It hasn't. It can't. It won't. For a very long time. 10,000 years. The same span of time that the cat has been with us. That's not a coincidence, either. Both the mismatch and the partnership were born in the same moment. The moment we stopped moving and started farming. The moment we traded the open savanna for the grain store in the village and, eventually, the city and the screen. And here is the quiet, accidental genius of the cat. The cat is an analog remedy in a digital world.
Think about what the cat provides, and then think about what modern life has taken away, and notice how precisely the two overlap. Modern life is noisy, not just in decibels, though it is that too, but in information. Your brain is processing more data in a single day than a Neolithic human would have processed in a month. Notifications, headlines, advertisements, emails, texts, the constant, low-grade hum of being reachable at all times, of being expected to respond, to perform, to be available. Your nervous system reads this as threat, not the sharp, acute threat of a predator. Your amygdala can handle that. It was built for that. But the diffuse, unresolvable threat of a world that never stops demanding and never confirms that you've done enough. The cat demands nothing. Modern life is performative. Social media has turned existence into a stage. Every meal is potentially a photograph. Every thought is potentially a post. Every interaction carries the weight of being observed, evaluated, quantified. You are performing your life for an audience that includes people you have never met, will never meet, and whose approval your brain craves anyway because it was wired to care about social standing in a group of 150, and it cannot tell the difference between the gaze of village elder and the gaze of stranger on a platform. The cat does not observe you. The cat does not evaluate you. The cat does not care whether you are successful, attractive, productive, or interesting. The cat cares whether you have opened the can. That is the entire assessment. You are, in the cat's economy, a can opener with a warm lap. And there is something so profoundly liberating about being reduced to that, about being in the presence of a creature whose expectations of you are so minimal, so concrete, so achievable, that your nervous system interprets it as safety. And safety, real, felt, physiological safety, is the thing your ancient brain is most desperate for and least likely to find in the modern world. The data supports this, not anecdotally, clinically. Studies on the physiological effects of cat ownership have found measurable reductions in cortisol, the primary stress hormone, in people who spend time with cats. Not just people who pet cats, people who are simply in the same room. The visual presence of a calm, resting animal, a creature whose entire posture communicates the message there is no danger here, is enough to shift the human autonomic nervous system from sympathetic activation, the fight or flight state that modern life chronically triggers, toward parasympathetic rest, the state your body needs to digest, repair, and sleep. A 2009 study following over 4,000 Americans over a 13-year period found that cat owners had a significantly lower risk of death from heart attack and stroke than non-owners, even after controlling for other risk factors like smoking, diet, and exercise. 13 years. For 1,000 people. The numbers were not subtle. The mechanism is not fully understood. But the leading hypothesis is straightforward. The cat reduces chronic stress. And chronic stress, the kind that never fully resolves, the kind that sits in your shoulders and your jaw, and the space behind your eyes, the kind that modern life specializes in producing, is the single greatest contributor to cardiovascular disease. The purr itself has been studied. That 25 Hz vibration we mentioned in part 3, the one the Neolithic woman felt on her lap without understanding, falls within a frequency range that has been shown to promote bone density, reduce inflammation, and accelerate soft tissue healing. Veterinary researchers have long noted that cats heal from fractures faster than dogs, and the prevailing theory is that the purr functions as a low-energy biological maintenance system, a way for an animal that spends 16 hours a day asleep to keep its body in repair without the metabolic cost of exercise. And when that vibration is transmitted to a human body through direct contact, a cat on your chest, a cat on your lap, a cat pressed against your legs as you fall asleep, your body responds. Not because it understands the frequency, but because your nervous system, like every mammalian nervous system on Earth, is tuned to interpret low-frequency vibration as safety, as calm, as the opposite of danger. This is not mysticism. This is biomechanics. The same way a baby calms when held against a parent's chest, and feels the heartbeat through the skin. The same way a low, steady hum, a car engine, a train on distant tracks, a washing machine in the next room, can lull you towards sleep even though none of those sounds are natural. Your brain is pattern matching. It's comparing the input to a library of signals built over millions of years, and a match it finds for a low, steady, warm vibration against the body is safe. Rest. Nothing is coming. You can let go. The cat is a 25 Hz lullaby wrapped in fur, and it has been singing that lullaby for 10,000 years. There's a darker thread here, though, one I don't want to skip, because it's important. Because this story, the story of humans and cats, is not all warmth and wonder. It has a chapter written in fire. Medieval Europe, the partnership that had survived for thousands of years, through the Neolithic, through Egypt, through Rome, through the migrations and upheavals of late antiquity, nearly ended. Not because of biology, not because of ecology, because of fear. Beginning in the 13th century and accelerating through the 14th and 15th, cats were systematically persecuted across much of Christian Europe. They were associated with witchcraft, with heresy, with the devil. Black cats in particular were seen as familiars, demonic companions of witches, shapeshifters, agents of evil. Papal bulls condemned them. Inquisitors targeted them. In some cities, cats were collected in wicker baskets and hoisted over bonfires on feast days, lowered into the flames while crowds watched and cheered, a practice so common it had its own name in French. Le-footed chats, the fire of the cats. In Metz, in Ypres, in Paris, the place to grieve. The smell of burning fur and the sound of screaming that isn't quite human carried across the square on a summer evening while families ate their suppers and children played in the streets. It is hard to write about. It is harder to understand how a creature that had lived peacefully alongside Europeans for millennia, catching their rats, sleeping on their hearths, raising kittens in their barns, became, in the space of a few generations, a symbol of everything demonic. But fear does this. Fear takes the familiar and makes it strange. Fear takes the quiet, independent, nocturnal animal with the reflective eyes, eyes that glow green in the dark when a candle catches them, and turns that glow into evidence of hellfire. Thousands were killed, tens of thousands, possibly more. The records are incomplete, and the killing was not always official or documented. Villagers drowned cats in rivers. Children threw them from bell towers. The association between cats and evil became so deeply embedded in the European psyche that it persisted in attenuated forms for centuries. The black cat superstition, still alive today, still a Halloween decoration, still a vague unease in the back of some minds, is a direct descendant of this medieval terror. And here is the bitter irony that historians have noted, though the causal link is debated and should not be overstated. The suppression of cats in medieval Europe coincided with the explosion of the rat population. And the rats carried fleas, and the fleas carried Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. I want to be careful here. The plague was not caused by the killing of cats. The plague was caused by a bacterium transmitted by fleas on rats, and its spread was driven by trade routes, population density, malnutrition, and 100 other factors. But the elimination of one of the primary predators of urban rats, at exactly the moment when rat-borne disease was about to devastate the continent, is one of those historical convergences that makes you want to sit down and stare at a wall for a while. The cat had been providing a service, silently, ungratefully, without contract or acknowledgement, keeping the rodent population in check the way it had been doing since the first grain store in the Fertile Crescent. And when humans, in a fit of superstitious panic, removed the cat from the equation broke. This is the warning. This is the mirror. Because we are, in many ways, in the middle of another great removal. Not cats. Cats are doing fine, numerically speaking. But of the wild, of the slow, of the analog, of the things that our brains were built to need and that we have been systematically eliminating from our lives in the name of efficiency, connectivity, and progress.
We have removed darkness. Real darkness. The kind that our circadian systems require to produce melatonin, the hormone of sleep, the chemical that tells your body the day is over and it's safe to rest. 70% of the world's population now lives under light-polluted skies. The average person is exposed to artificial light for 16 hours a day. Your pineal gland, which evolved to respond to the cycle of the sun, is confused. It has been confused for decades. Insomnia is not a personal failing. It is an environmental injury. We have removed silence. True silence. The kind where the only sounds are wind, water, animal calls, and the crackle of fire. The average urban environment exposes its inhabitants to a baseline noise level of 50 to 60 decibels, equivalent to a constant, never-ending conversation happening just outside your window. Your auditory cortex, which evolved to alert you to novel sounds against a backdrop of quiet, is exhausted. It has been scanning for threats in a wall of noise that never resolves into safety. We have removed unstructured social contact. The kind where you sit near someone you know and say nothing for an hour. The kind where proximity is enough. The kind that cats are masters of. Being in the room, being present, being warm, without performing, without transacting, without exchanging information. Modern social interaction is almost entirely transactional. We text with purpose. We call with agendas. We meet for reasons. The Neolithic village had none of this. People were simply near each other. All the time. And the nervous system, your nervous system, right now, the one that's been running since before you were born, reads unstructured, purposeless proximity as safety, as belonging, as home. The cat offers all three. Darkness. Cats are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk, and they spend the rest of the time in a state of quiet that invites quiet in return. Silence. Cats are among the quietest domestic animals on Earth, producing sound only when they choose to, and even then at volumes so low you have to lean in to hear. An unstructured proximity. The cat on the end of the bed, the cat on the back of the couch, the cat in the same room, but doing its own thing, asking nothing, offering nothing except the fact of its breathing, warm, living presence. This is why the cat survived the transition to modernity. Not because we kept needing mousers, not because we bred them into dependence, but because the thing the cat has always provided, quiet, warm, undemanding presence, turns out to be the exact thing that the modern world is most aggressively stripping away. The cat is not a luxury. The cat is a corrective, a biological patch for a software environment that your hardware was never designed to run. And here we are, 8 billion humans, 600 million cats, a relationship that started at a grain store and now sustains a global industry worth over $100 billion a year, in food, in veterinary care, in toys shaped like mice that no cat has ever mistaken for an actual mouse, but bats around anyway, because the hunting software is still running, always running, beneath the surface of every nap and every slow blink and every boneless sprawl across a keyboard. The cat chose us 10,000 years ago. It chose us again when it crossed the Mediterranean on Egyptian and Roman ships. It chose us again when it survived the fires of medieval Europe and came back. Because it always comes back, because the deal is still good, because the mice are still there, metaphorically if not literally. And we chose the cat, not with a decision, not with a contract, with something older and quieter, with the simple, repeated act of leaving the door open, of not throwing the stone, of putting a dish of food on the floor, and then pretending we don't care whether the cat eats it or not, even though we do, even though we are watching from the corner of our eye, even though the small, warm fact of the cat eating from the dish we provided gives us a satisfaction so deep and so irrational that no economist or evolutionary biologist has ever fully explained it. We need the cat, not for mice anymore, for something older than mice, for the feeling of not being alone in the dark. We'll bring this home, all the way home, to the cat on your bed, to the breath in your lungs, to the 10,000 years of choices, tiny, silent, and signed, that led to this exact moment. You, lying still, listening to a stranger's voice, while a descendant of a North African desert predator sleeps 3 feet away. We'll talk about resilience, about how this species, both species, yours and the cat's, survived things that should have ended the story a dozen times over. Ice ages, plagues, fires, famines, the near-total collapse of the ecosystem that made the partnership possible in the first place. And we'll talk about what it means to rest, really rest, the way the cat rests, with the full weight of the body, surrender to gravity, and the full attention of the mind, surrender to nothing. But not yet. For now, breathe. Feel the surface beneath you, the mattress, the cushion, the pillow, whatever is holding your weight right now. Let it hold it fully. You don't have to hold yourself up. Gravity is doing that work. It has been doing that work since the moment the Earth formed, 4.5 billion years ago, from a spinning disk of gas and dust around a young star. Gravity held you before you were born. It will hold you after you're gone. And right now, it's holding you and a cat, in the same building, on the same planet, at the same time. Feel the air moving in and out of your lungs, that ancient, automatic rhythm that has been running since the moment you were born and will not stop until the very end. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to earn it. It just happens. The way the cat just happens. The way the partnership just happened. Some of the best things are the ones nobody planned. We're near the end now. And if you've been drifting, in and out, catching a phrase here, losing a paragraph there, surfacing for a moment, and then sliding back under, that's good. That's what this was built for. Your brain has been listening even when you weren't. Some of this has settled into you, the way pollen settles into the cracks of old wood. You won't know it's there until something shakes it loose, a cat walking across a room, A nature documentary mentioning the Fertile Crescent, the smell of grain in a bakery, and then a fragment will rise. A word, an image, the amber eye of a wildcat watching you from 10,000 years away. That's how memory works. Not like a filing cabinet, like sediment. And tonight, we've laid down a lot of layers. So let me tell you what you are. Not what you do, not where you live, not what your name is. What you are, in the deepest, most literal, most biological sense of the word. You are a survivor. Not metaphorically, not in the motivational poster sense. Literally, genetically, chemically. Every cell in your body is a receipt, a record of transactions that succeeded. Every strand of your DNA is a chain of victories so improbable that the mind slides off them the way water slides off stone. You cannot hold the number in your head. You cannot feel the weight of it. But I want you to try. You are here because every single one of your ancestors, everyone, without exception, across an unbroken chain stretching back 3.5 billion years to the first self-replicating molecule in a warm, shallow sea, survived long enough to reproduce. Not most of them, all of them. Every single link held. Every single generation found food, found shelter, found a mate, avoided the predator, recovered from the illness, endured the famine, crossed the river, survived the winter. One failure, one, anywhere in that chain, and you don't exist. The specific combination of genes that makes you you, your eye color, your fingerprints, the exact pitch of your laugh, the way your brain processes music, the shape of your earlobes, would never have assembled. The universe would have continued without you, and no one would have noticed, because there would have been no you to miss. But the chain didn't break. It bent. It frayed. It came close, so many times, that the near misses are written into your DNA like scar tissue. But it held. Consider just a few of the things that almost ended your line. 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano in what is now Sumatra erupted with a force that makes every modern natural disaster look like a sneeze. It threw enough ash into the atmosphere to block a significant portion of sunlight for years. Temperatures dropped. Forests died. Food chains collapsed. Genetic evidence suggests that the human population may have fallen to as few as a few thousand breeding individuals. A bottleneck so severe that the entire species could have fit in a single modern sports stadium. Every human alive today passed through the eye of that needle. Every one of us descends from that tiny group of survivors who found enough food, enough warmth, enough will to keep going in a world that had gone cold and gray and quiet. Your ancestors were in that stadium. They made it out, and they kept going, through ice ages and mega droughts and a vast, terrifying emptiness of the open ocean when small groups set out in wooden boats for islands they couldn't see, gambling their lives on currents and stars, and the desperate faith that there was something on the other side. Some of those boats sank. Some of those gamblers lost. But your line held. Every time. Without exception. Because if it hadn't, even once, the thread would have snapped, and you would not be lying here listening to this. You are the result of an unbroken winning streak that stretches back to the origin of life itself. 3.5 billion years without a single loss. And the same is true of the cat. Felis libica should not be in your house. Think about the absurdity of it. A solitary desert predator from the grasslands of North Africa and the Near East. An animal whose entire evolutionary strategy is built on independence, on silence, on the avoidance of every other creature larger than a mouse, is sleeping on your furniture, on your clothes, on your laptop, which it has chosen over the expensive bed you bought specifically for it, because cats are chaos theorists and a laptop is warm. This animal survived the drying of the Sahara. It survived the retreat of the forest during the last glacial maximum, when the world was colder and drier, and the grasslands that Felis libica depended on shrank to thin corridors between desert and ice. It survived the arrival of larger predators, jackals, hyenas, eagles, by being faster, quieter, and more paranoid than anything else in its weight class. It survived for millions of years without human help, without human approval, without human anything. And then it walked into a grain store. And it stayed. Not because it had to, because the math worked out. And here we are, 10,000 years later. The grain store became a barn. The barn became a house. The house became an apartment. The apartment became a high-rise with triple-glazed windows and underfloor heating and a subscription-based food delivery service for the cat that lives in it. The environment has changed beyond recognition. The relationship has not. Still quiet. Still mutual. Still unsigned. The cat has survived everything humans have done to the world, and everything humans have done to cats. It survived the deforestation of the Mediterranean. It survived the urbanization of Europe. It survived the fires of the Inquisition, when thousands of its kind were burned because a frightened species needed a scapegoat, and the cat, nocturnal, independent, unreadable, was too easy a target. It survived the modern world, with its cars and its poisons and its habitat destruction and its well-meaning, but sometimes catastrophic interventions. And it survived all of this with an almost insulting lack of genetic change. The same genome, the same body plan, the same retractable claws and vertical pupils, and that impossible, liquid spine that lets it twist midair and land on its feet from a height that would shatter your ankles. The same brain, more or less. The same instincts, more or less. The same quiet, calculating stare that says, very clearly, asterisk, I am here because I choose to be. Not because you made me. Asterisk. There is something in that. Something in the cat's stubborn, magnificent refusal to be fully domesticated that I think we recognize. Something that speaks to a part of us that also refuses to be fully tamed by the world we've built. The part that stays up too late. The part that stares out of windows. The part that feels, in the quiet hours, a pull towards something older and wilder and less explainable than anything on our screens. The cat is the wildest thing most of us will ever share a bed with. And maybe that's why we love it. Not despite its independence. Because of it. Because in a world that asks us to be available, to be compliant, to be optimized and measured and endlessly productive, the cat refuses. The cat has always refused. It refused 10,000 years ago at the grain store, and it refuses now on your kitchen counter. It knocks things off tables not because it doesn't understand gravity, but because gravity is your problem, not the cat's. It sits in boxes too small for it, because the box is where it wants to be, and your opinion on the matter was not solicited. It stares at walls for minutes at a time, tracking something you cannot see, and when you look at the wall and see nothing, the cat is not embarrassed. You're simply not equipped. There is a word for what the cat has maintained across 10,000 years of partnership. The word is sovereignty, not independence. Independence implies separation, implies distance. The cat is not distant. The cat is right there, on your lap, against your feet, between you and your keyboard. The cat is as close as any animal can be. But it is sovereign. It belongs to itself. It has always belonged to itself. And its presence in your home is not a concession of that sovereignty, but an expression of it. Because a sovereign creature that chooses to stay is offering you something that a captive creature never can. It is offering you trust. Real trust. The kind that can be withdrawn at any moment, and therefore means something precisely because it hasn't been. I want to put something into perspective for you. One last deep time frame before we go. If the entire history of life on Earth, all 3.5 billion years of it, were compressed into a single calendar year, starting on January 1st with the first self-replicating molecule, then mammals would not appear until mid-December. The lineage that leads to cats and the lineage that leads to humans would split from each other on roughly December 26th. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, your species, the one lying in bed right now, would appear at approximately 11:58 p.m. on December 31st, 2 minutes before midnight on the last day of the year. And the cat's decision to walk into the grain store, the entire 10,000-year partnership, that would happen in the final fraction of the final second, of the final minute, of the final hour of the final day. Less than a blink, less than a heartbeat, a span of time so vanishingly small, relative to the history of life, that it barely registers on any scale we can draw. And yet it is the most important fraction of a second in this story. Because everything that came before it, the 85 million years of divergence, the ice ages, the continental shifts, the extinction of the dinosaurs, the rise of the grasslands, the evolution of the grain, the evolution of the mouse, the evolution of the cat, was prologue. All of it. 3.5 billion years of prologue, building toward a moment when a small predator and a large primate would find themselves standing on the same patch of ground, eating from the same food chain, sleeping under the same stars, and deciding, in the slow, wordless, generational language of survival, that this was acceptable, that this was good enough, that this was worth continuing. You and the cat, reunited, after 85 million years apart, sharing a bed. If that doesn't make you feel something, some flicker of wonder, some faint vibration in the chest, then I don't know what will. And now I want to speak to you directly, not to the audience, to you, the person listening. It's late where you are, or it's early, or it's somewhere in between. One of those strange, suspended hours when the world feels like it's holding its breath. You're lying still. Your body is heavy. The muscles in your face, the ones around your eyes, the ones in your jaw, the tiny ones along your forehead that you didn't even realize were tense. Let them go. Just release them. Feel the difference. Feel how much effort it takes to hold a face together, and how little it takes to let one rest. Your hands, wherever they are, at your sides, on your chest, curled loosely around a pillow or a phone, let them open. Let the fingers uncurl. Your hands have been gripping things all day. Tools, steering wheels, handles, screens, the invisible weight of tasks and responsibilities and decisions. They can stop now. There is nothing to hold. The day, whatever it held, whatever it asked of you, whatever it took, is over. It's done. You survived it. The way your ancestors survived theirs. The way the cat's ancestors survived the drying Sahara and the fires of Ypres and the crossing to Cyprus in a boat made of pitch and prayer. You survived it. And now you get to do the thing that every living creature on Earth has done since the first nervous system evolved the ability to rest. You get to sleep, to let the brain go quiet, to let the body repair, to let the mind, which has been running all day, scanning, calculating, worrying, planning, remembering, performing, finally, mercifully, stop. The cat already knows how to do this. The cat has always known. 16 hours a day, it practices the art of surrender, not to another creature, not to a master or a leader, but to gravity, to stillness, to the deep, biological truth that rest is not laziness. Rest is maintenance. Rest is the thing that lets everything else continue. And the cat does not apologize for it. This is perhaps the most important lesson the cat has to teach, and it has been teaching it, silently, by example, for 100 centuries. The cat does not feel guilty for sleeping. It does not lie awake rehearsing tomorrow's tasks. It does not calculate whether it has earned the right to close its eyes. It simply recognizes, with a clarity that humans have almost entirely lost, that the body needs what it needs, and the body needs rest, and rest is not something you earn. It is something you allow. Watch the cat sleep, if you can. Or remember the last time you watched a cat sleep. The total commitment to it. The complete absence of guilt. The way the body goes so soft that it seems to melt into whatever surface it's resting on, as if the cat and the couch are slowly becoming the same object. The way a paw twitches, a tiny, involuntary flutter, the echo of a dream haunt, a mouse that only exists in the sleeping brain's private theater. There is no tension in a sleeping cat, no hell breath, no clenched jaw, no mental checklist running beneath the surface. Just rest. Pure, absolute, unapologetic rest. You are allowed to do that too. You are allowed to let go of the day, to let go of the week, to let go of the things you didn't finish and the things you wish you'd done differently and the things you're worried about tomorrow. None of that is needed right now. Right now, the only thing your body is asking for is the same thing the cat's body is asking for: stillness, warmth, the slow, rhythmic work of repair that happens only in the dark, only in the quiet, only when you stop. So stop. Here is what I believe, for whatever it's worth. I believe that the story of life on Earth is, at its core, a story about things finding each other in the dark. Molecules finding molecules. Cells finding cells. Organisms finding niches. Species finding arrangements that let them persist one more generation, one more century, one more millennium. Most of these arrangements are invisible. Most of them happen between creatures that will never be named, in ecosystems that will never be studied, in deep time that will never be witnessed by a conscious mind. But they happen, constantly, relentlessly, life reaching toward life, not because it intends to, but because reaching is what life does. And the cat's choice, that original choice, 10,000 years ago, to walk toward the firelight instead of away from it, is one of the most quietly extraordinary examples of that reaching in the entire history of the planet. Not because it changed the world, not because it built empires or cured diseases or put a flag on the moon, but because it didn't need to do any of those things. It was small. It was private. It was two species, in the dark, deciding that the other one was tolerable. And from that tolerance, just tolerance, nothing more, something grew that has outlasted empires and plagues and the rise and fall of every civilization that has ever existed. I believe the cat is still making that choice. Every day. Every time it walks into a room where you're sitting and does not leave. Every time it settles near you. Not on you, necessarily, not always, but near you, within range, close enough that you can hear its breathing if the room is quiet enough. That is the choice. That is the 10,000-year-old agreement, renewed in real time, in your living room, right now. And I believe that you're making it too. Every time you fill the bowl, every time you open the door at an inconvenient hour, every time you shift your position in bed to avoid disturbing the small, warm weight at your feet, even though it's your bed, even though you're the one paying the rent, even though the cat would recover from the disruption in approximately 4 seconds, and you both know it. You shift anyway, because the deal holds, because the tolerance has become something more, something that neither species has a perfect word for, but that both species recognize in the body, in the breath, in the quiet warmth of a shared silence. Thank you for being here tonight. I mean that, more than you might think. What we just did together, this slow walk through 10,000 years of shared history, only exists because you press play, because you chose to spend your last waking minutes not scrolling, not worrying, not planning, but listening to a story about a cat, about a grain store, about a woman grinding wheat in the dark, about the quiet, unlikely miracle of two species that found each other at the edge of a fire and never fully let go. However long you stayed, whether you heard every word or drifted off somewhere between the Fertile Crescent and the Middle Ages, whether you're reading these words behind your eyelids in a half-dream state, or whether you're still fully awake and wondering what time it is, thank you. Your time is the only thing you can never get back, and you spent some of it here, in the dark, learning about a small animal that decided we were worth the trouble. If you enjoyed this, if something in it made you feel quieter or smaller in a good way, or more connected to the strange, improbable chain of events that put you where you are right now, I'd be grateful if you left a like, if you subscribed, if you hit the notification bell so you'll know when the next one arrives. And if you want to, tell me in the comments, where are you? What time is it? Is there a cat near you? What's its name? I read every one. They're my favorite part of this. And if you know someone who needs this, someone who can't sleep, someone who's anxious, someone who loves their cat, but has never thought about why, someone who just needs a voice in the dark telling them that the world is older and stranger and more beautiful than the news makes it seem, send it to them. That's how these stories survive. Not by algorithm, by sharing, by one person saying to another, asterisk here, listen to this. It helped me. Asterisk. One more thing. Tomorrow morning, or this afternoon, or whenever you wake, you're going to open your eyes. And for a moment, the world will be soft, unfocused, the way the world always is in the first seconds of waking, before the brain boots up fully and loads the day's agenda. In that moment, everything is just light and shape and warmth. Nothing is urgent. Nothing is expected. You are just a body, waking up, the way bodies have been waking up for hundreds of millions of years, slowly, reluctantly, with a deep animal resistance to leaving the warmth of rest. And the world is going to be there, with all its noise and its demands and its screens and its urgency. And for a moment, before the day starts, before the first notification arrives, before you even fully remember what day it is, you might see the cat, stretching, yawning, arching its back in that slow, luxurious, full-body curve that uses every vertebra in its impossible spine, blinking at you with eyes that are the same amber gold they were 10,000 years ago. The same amber gold they were when its ancestors watched the first fires of the first settlements from the safety of the long grass. And the cat will look at you, and you will look at the cat. And for a second, just a second, before the coffee and the emails and the everything, the two of you will be exactly where you've always been. Together, in the same room, in the same light. Two mammals, descended from the same trembling ancestor, sharing the same air. The deal still holds. The door is still open. And the cat, your cat, the world's cat, the 10,000-year-old ghost of the North African grasslands that somehow ended up on your pillow, is still here, still choosing,